That's for you next time. All right. Josh, if you're ready, us get this ball rolling. You have a lot to report on.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Madam Chair, Commissioner, full board. Hope everyone's doing well today. We'll do a state and federal update. For the state piece, just really cover the most recent news around the continuation of the Freight and Logistics Commission, and this one's called the Commission on the E-commerce and Freight Infrastructure. So the most recent news we've had is both the House and Senate have announced the membership of the committee, and you'll see some familiar faces on here. You got 4 House members, 4 senators. Both the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor were allowed 2 private sector selections. Rick Jaspers is the chairman on the House side. Steve Gooch is chair on the Senate side. One familiar facial notice on the Senate private sector appointee is a former GDOT board member, Don Grantham. And another face you recognize is our commissioner, who's on the commission once again as ex officio, along with the executive director of GPA. So we will anticipate that they'll come out with their schedule shortly. We think probably the first meeting will be sometime in August, and they'll probably keep a steady pace going into what we'll expect. There'll be some special session dealing with the reapportionment, and they may try and hem those meetings in between those time periods, but we'll keep the board informed. Another thing to note is, as part of this process, and including the budget, was funding for the department to engage and do a study to work in conjunction with this commission. So we're in the process of that, and we'll update when we have additional news. And we would expect this process will go into 2022. Also, as we look towards the update from planning of the freight and logistics study at the end of next year. So certainly there's a lot of developments, and we're going to do what we need to support the commission in that role. So next, I'll jump into 2 things on the federal front. One is the bipartisan framework, and the other is the passage in the House of the INVEST Act. Just a recap of some recent developments. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee passed their portion. If you remember the last month on the Senate side on dealing with reauthorization, there are 3 different committees in the Senate, 4 if you count the financing piece, but 3 when it comes to policy matters that have a role in passing reauthorization. Senate EPW passed their part unanimously. I think the day of our committee meeting, the CST, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation, passed their piece unanimously. We're still waiting on the HUB and the Banking and Urban and HUD committee to pass the portion dealing with transit. So that's still what's pending in the Senate. And since last we met, the president announced, we had the gang of 10 that became the gang of 20. That I think now is up to a gang of 22. The gang is growing. And they were able to, the administration came out and endorsed the plan that they had for, it's about a $1.2 trillion overall bill. The new funding that would go to physical infrastructure is $579 billion. That was announced on June the 24th. The House passed the INVEST Act on July the 1st, and we'll talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about the bipartisan plan as well as the INVEST Act, since those are the most recent developments. Well, actually, the most recent development was yesterday. There was an announcement about an agreement with the Senate Budget Committee majority members to move a reconciliation bill of about $3.5 trillion. That's the broader kind of soft infrastructure, people infrastructure piece of the conversation. They're trying to create a dual track. We talked about that at the last meeting. Sort of the regular order is you got to have 60 votes, but this budget mechanism, they only have to have 50. So this would be that only 51 votes to proceed. So we'll certainly have to look at this and how it interplays with the movement of the bipartisan plan. For the bipartisan infrastructure framework, $312 billion for the transportation infrastructure, $109 for roads and bridges, $109 billion for roads and bridges, $66 billion for passenger and freight rail, $49 billion for public transit, $25 billion for airports, $20 billion for infrastructure financing, $16 billion for ports and waterways, $11 billion for safety, $7.5 billion for EV, and $7.5 billion for electric bus transit upgrades to electric. And $1 billion and this would probably span an 8-year period, and $1 billion for a program that would fund projects to help reconnect communities that have been impacted over decades from transportation projects that may have divided communities and had an impact to try and reconnect them. The pieces of it that are non-transportation, $266 billion total, $73 billion for power, $65 billion for broadband, $55 billion for water, $47 billion for resiliency projects, those things kind of pre-disaster mitigation type activities, $21 billion for environmental remediation, and $5 billion for Western water storage. So those are the pieces of the bipartisan plan. Now I'm going to jump into the INVEST Act, and I'm not going to go through every line on this, but again, we talked about the overall increases that INVEST did on the baseline amount. But I did want to, what you see boxed off there are the new programs dealing with resiliency, so that pre-disaster mitigation, as well as the carbon footprint, kind of a CMAQ plus type program. And so you see that column there under a portion, those are all the formula programs that will come back to the states. And we'll follow up with a list of how much we expect Georgia to get. These are the national totals, but so you can get some sense of the scale of increase. And then at the bottom, you see an electric vehicle, the Clean Corridor program, that's for funding EV and funding the EV corridors as well. So putting out the charging equipment as well as improvements to electric vehicle or alternative fuel vehicle corridors. And then there's also a grant program that will be competitive for that same purpose I've highlighted in red. On the grant side, you've got the TIPIA program. I'm just calling these out because one, TIPIA has been a huge program for GDOT in our MMIP. And then the Infra grant that's been renamed, but that you can see the increase there to that competitive program. A grant program for commercial vehicle parking. You can see that at $250 million per year. And then their benchmark for reconnecting neighborhoods at about $750 million per year. Now I'll note is even though this is a 5-year bill, authorization bill, some of these programs will not kick in until the second year of the bill, in part to allow the agency to stand up the regs around the grant. On the FTA side, you can see here, you've got at the top some one-time investment over the 5-year period for improving access to transit stations as well as reducing transit deserts, so investments in those areas that maybe have no transit service. And then I've just underscored the key programs that we utilize today that come down through GDOT or through the ATL to the locals, just so you can see that increase in the grant amount. So some significant increases in these formula-funded programs to transit, as well as a capital investment grant at the bottom. You can see that increase. Next, on the rail side, there's 2 new programs. One is the Prime grants. You saw there's a big push for trying to do more in the space of intercity passenger rail. So you can see a massive investment they're making there to grants for that purpose. The CRISI program, which I haven't highlighted, but certainly we're excited to see that amount go up. That's a program that GDOT has made full use of in the past. One of our key pieces, though, is making sure that we've got state funding available to match that. So that's always something we try and ensure that we've got those funds. They have to be general funds or bond funds, but that's an important piece of that. And then there's a new program dealing with bridges, stations, and tunnels as well. So there's some definitely increase in funds for the rail side, saw a big plus up. And then the bottom, the electric vehicle investments, the EV charging stations, conversion of vehicles, and some other manufacturing advancements. Help from the audience. I'm trying to remember. Rail.
Consolidated rail infrastructure something investment. We'll get it to you. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. We all failed that test.
All right. So with that, here's a little bit, and I give credit for these slides pulled from the Eno Center for Transportation. They did a good job of laying these out. This just kind of does a comparison of the bipartisan framework, and it's increased over the baseline amount in the authorization. You can see that the bipartisan framework is almost about $300 billion more compared to the House version, which is the Invest Act, which is 232. So it shows kind of a comparison of the two. So summary and outlook. Mentioned yesterday the introduction of that reconciliation package. How that interplays with this conversation about the bipartisan bill, with the politics of that, will be something we'll have to watch. And that will tell us whether or not they pass this bipartisan plan that then maybe sits on top of the reauthorization, so sitting on top of either the Invest Act or the Senate EPW committee's version. And then we know that the clock that's ticking there is that September 30th is when the current authorization expires, as well as the current Appropriations Act. So, you know, the calendar there shows again the House and Senate calendar, just to give you some sense of scope of where they are now. They've actually, both chambers, with the House having passed its version and the Senate having made some significant progress on theirs, you know, that's certainly doable if they can get those agreements in place. Yes, sir. I think it depends on how they try to solve that. If they do a clean extension, let's say they decide that they don't think they can, like one option may be they think that, well, if they have another quarter, like getting into December, they could come up with a bill. They might just do a short-term extension of the FAST Act and a continuing resolution. Then they may come to the conclusion just to do an extension of the FAST Act and kind of punt it a year. And that would, to your point, probably affect the horizon of the bill. So it really depends on where they think what they think they can achieve by September the 30th. And with that, I think that concludes my slides.
Thank you, Josh. Any other questions for Josh on his report? If not, Josh, thank you. You do a great job. We appreciate all the hard work and what you do for this department. See if you can have us a federal budget, though, by the next meeting.
We'll do the best I can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, all your help.
With that, the committee is adjourned.
Thank you. Don't ask me to repeat this. I should have called Jimmy out of order. You're up, Robert, anytime.
Oh, she told me wait for a couple of minutes. You ready? Okay.
Yeah.
Equal Access Committee meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Kimberly King if she'll come and give us a discussion on DBE goal setting update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Commissioner. I am bringing you sort of a dual update today. Both on our DBE reporting and our triennial goal setting. So the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise goal is mandated by the Code of Federal Regulations at 49 CFR Part 26. But in fact, the whole program really is governed by that particular regulation. So all of our regulatory guidance comes from the Code of Federal Regulations at Part 26. So what we're talking about is the role of the DBE as it relates to that reporting and that goal setting that we do. So the code requires that we have sort of a connect the dots approach to all things DBE. So the first thing we do is outreach. We are constantly going out. Now we're doing it virtually, easing back into in-person engagement, but we are constantly identifying firms that could be eligible to receive certification as disadvantaged business enterprises. Once those firms are certified, we are then responsible for supporting and assisting those firms to get them engaged in those federally funded projects that are provided to us by Federal Highway Administration dollars, federal transit dollars, et cetera. Once those firms then are certified and engaged on those projects, we have a responsibility to monitor that project activity to make sure that the DBEs that are there are participating in the number anticipated by the participation goal that we have set on that project. We are monitoring those projects to make sure the subcontract opportunities that have been provided to those DBEs are per that subcontract, they're being paid accordingly, that the project is working in the manner required by that federal guidance that I talked about. And so once we've done the certification and the support and the engagement and the monitoring, that's where we get into the reporting, right? We are reporting what those firms are doing on those projects that are being monitored. And that reporting then leads to our triennial goal setting. So you can see there's sort of this connect the dots, this cycle that we utilize. And so we're reviewing those projects when we are getting ready to set goals monthly. Once those goals are set, we then communicate with our supportive services provider that these projects are upcoming, that they offer opportunity for DBE participation at a particular goal number, that those DBEs are being notified about those opportunities, they are being engaged as it relates to those opportunities, they are being assisted by our supportive services firm as it relates to those opportunities, and that we then are able to monitor the what, when, where, how of that DBE participation on those project types. So we do that both with our federally funded disadvantaged business enterprise supportive services and with our state-funded disadvantaged business enterprise supportive services. The state side is dealing both with small business, veteran-owned firms, with DBEs, but the engagement, the robust intentional engagement, is happening on both sides of the house, both as it relates to our federally funded contracts and our state-funded contracts. What are we doing? We are having live virtual interactive webinars going on. We again are moving slowly back into in-person engagement, but they are in small groups. They are by appointment only in some instances, days certain in certain instances, because folks still aren't terribly comfortable being in one another's company, certainly in large groups, but we accommodate people that do have an interest in so doing. So we are meeting them both virtually and in person. We're doing these kinds of workshops that you see, DBE capability statements, financial management. The startup and growth planning is the most recent addition to the cadre of training that we offer to our disadvantaged business enterprises. And I actually attended that one because we talked a lot about what that should look like. And that startup and growth planning really is about sort of having those DBE firms start at the beginning of a project and really look through that project in its entirety to think about whether or not it's even something that they ought to get engaged in. Is this the kind of project that you should be bidding on? Because what we don't want is for the firms to submit bid, proposal on the projects, be awarded the projects, and then be somewhat overwhelmed by the project activity. So you want to be clear before you're bidding on these projects what this project is going to entail, what the expectations are from the agency, from the contractor for your work product on that project. So that startup and growth planning workshop has been really well attended, has been really well thought out in terms of really starting at the beginning of the project and thinking about whether or not this is something that you want to get engaged in. And if so, then let us go through each of the steps very meticulously about what the expectation is going to be. Perfecting your pricing, marketing, and sales. These roundtable sessions where the DBEs get to have peer-to-peer exchanges have been very popular as well. On the federally funded supportive services side, but also on the state-funded side, we are doing much of that same sort of engagement, again, virtually for the most part, because we are easing slowly back into the in-person engagement. We recently finished a virtual workshop in District 2, where we talked about the routine maintenance activity, what was upcoming. The firms got to meet and talk with the district engineer and the maintenance staff about what their expectations were for those coming projects. So it's always good for those DBEs first to hear firsthand what the expectation is for those coming projects, and then to learn about how to get engaged in those projects. So that's what our supportive services folk are doing on the state side. I mentioned both the state and the federally funded supportive services because we want to make clear that DBE is being assisted, is being thought about, is being supported on both sides of the house, even though it is clearly a federal construct. So what does that engagement mean? Well, part of that regulation that I talked about, 49 CFR Part 26, has very specific language about us making sure that we are providing opportunity, creating project types that allow disadvantaged business enterprise to operate as prime contractors. So DBE really is about subcontract. We're looking at those projects for subcontract opportunity because that's what the goal is based on. That prime contract opportunity happens when the DBE is able to submit proposal as the prime of that contract. So he or she or it is not waiting to be contacted for a subcontract opportunity, but instead is submitting proposal itself for a prime contracting opportunity. We are encouraged to make sure that we are providing those kinds of opportunities on our federally funded projects from that 49 CFR Part 26 regulation. And so we've been doing that, and we've been very deliberate in how we do it. Again, identifying those project types, setting goals specific on those project types, identifying those opportunities for our supportive services group, making sure the supportive services then are notifying DBEs about those opportunities and then getting them engaged. What has that done for us? What has that done for the DBEs? Well, again, every year in June and December, we report on our goal attainment, and included in that report is how we're doing in terms of prime contracting opportunity. In June of 2019, we reported 8 such prime contracts. June of 2020, we reported 17 prime contracts awarded to disadvantaged business enterprises. In June of 2021, last month, we reported 31 prime contract awards to disadvantaged business enterprises. What does that mean in terms of dollars? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. $23,784,722 was awarded to disadvantaged business enterprises acting as prime contractors. That is 3 times, a little more than 3 times, what we reported in 2020, and nearly 4 times what we reported in 2019. Again, that is because we're being very deliberate in looking at those projects, in securing notification of those project opportunities for our DBEs, and then making sure that our supportive services understand the import of getting in touch with those DBEs early enough to help them understand how those opportunities look and how to get engaged in them. So obviously engagement has value because that 23 million and change is being added to the bottom line very specifically of our disadvantaged business enterprises. So our DBE firms obviously are working on our federally funded projects. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about 49 CFR Part 26. But they're also working on our state-funded projects. $67 million, $67.9 million, or 9% goal attainment was reported in June of 2021 as it relates to DBE firms being awarded during the reporting period of October to March. $61.5 million was awarded to DBEs on our MMIP projects in that period. $8.3 million was awarded to DBE firms on maintenance activity or state-funded projects, and another $463,000 to DBEs on rapid response projects. In total, that's more than $138 million awarded to disadvantaged business enterprises in these project types. Again, because we are being deliberate and intentional in making sure that we are identifying these opportunities, we are communicating that these opportunities are available, and we're making sure our supportive services are engaging our DBEs on these project types.
Tell me again the period of time.
Yes, sir. So The reports that we're talking about that are done twice annually in June and December are for the reporting period from October to March in June and from September to April in December. So we'll report again in December on that report on what we are achieving in terms of DBE goal attainment.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So again, we just want to point out that DBEs are being sought out for engagement. We are looking for these firms. We are certifying these firms. We are assisting and supporting these firms with our supportive services engagement. We are monitoring the projects on which these firms are working to make sure that they are working at the numbers that have been supported and proposed, that they are being paid in the dollar amounts that have been proposed, that their subcontracts meet the criteria set out in the federal regulations. And because we're doing that, we're able then to look at and review those project-specific goals we're setting to make sure that we move toward the overall agency goal, which is what the second half of the conversation about methodology is all about. So that triennial goal setting is about, we're setting goals on our project so that we can get to that overall agency goal and communicate that overall agency goal to our federal operating administrations, Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. So there is a very specific formula that we use to communicate that, and that goal setting is for a 3-year period. So for 2022, 2023, and 2024, we will be reporting a very specific number to Federal Highway and to Federal Transit in terms of the overall agency goal for projects funded by those entities. What do we do? 2 steps. Step 1 is to assign a base figure, or to create a base figure based on, first, all of the DBE firms that are ready, willing, and able to do the kind of work anticipated by a GDOT project. So we're going to get with our construction and engineering staffs, and we're going to look at what is upcoming in terms of project types. We have work codes that are descriptive of those work types, those project types. And so we look at the DBEs that operate in those codes. That's where we get the ready, willing, and able DBE number. The denominator is all firms ready, willing, and able to do the kind of work anticipated by a GDOT project, and then those are weighted, again, based on the work activity. So if you've got 24 DBEs that do asphalt, you're going to weigh that 24 DBE by the percentage of asphalt projects that are coming up. Once you then have that step 1 calculated baseline for our federal highway dollar, that is 17.29%. We move then to our step 2, which is an adjustment based on what we've done in prior years. So we look at what we've done in prior years in terms of past participation, and we secure the median number, and we use that to add to our step 1 baseline, divide by 2, get an overall figure. For FHWA funded projects, that number is 14.74%. We will round that to 15%, and we will then report to the Federal Highway Administration that our overall agency goal for the next 3 years, 2022, 2023, 2024, will be 15%. We do exactly that same calculation for our Federal Transit Administration projects. We again use 2022, 2023, 2024, coming 3 years of goal setting for FTA funded projects. You get first your step 1 base figure, very same calculation, very same equation. Step 1 is to find the ready, willing, and able DBE firms that operate in the transit space. As it relates to all firms ready, willing, and able to do the kind of work anticipated by our transit projects, weigh those based on the work activity that is anticipated for those next 3 years, get a base figure. Here, base figure 0.64%. Move on to your step 2 adjustment. Again, exactly the same as FHWA. Find your median past participation, 11.39%. Add that to your step 1 base figure, divide by 2. Your goal comes out to 6.015%. We round that to 6.02%, and we then communicate to the Federal Transit Administration that the overall agency FTA goal for the next 3 years will be 6.02%. So we have the goal for Federal Highway, Federal Transit. We will communicate that goal in a written document that will have the equations that I showed you, but will also have narrative that explains some of what I talked to you about before we got here, how we are attaining those goals, how we are setting goals on projects specifically, what we are doing in terms of supporting and assisting DBEs to get engaged on these projects, and then allow us an opportunity to monitor the projects for that engagement and report. So we are constantly working toward meeting those goals that we're setting for the overall agency every 3 years. 15% for federal highway, 6.02% for FTA will be communicated to each of those agencies based on the report, or excuse me, the presentation, I guess, that I provided to you today. That is the entirety of my presentation. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
The math guy in me can't avoid the question. The FTA calculation showed, if I understand correctly, that based on the number of ready, willing, and able participants, you had a ridiculously low percentage, and then you had this 11%. Just doesn't make sense. Can you explain it?
Well, yes, that's about, again, the coming, so your past participation is based on what you did the previous 3 years, because that previous 3 years is likely to be indicative of what you're going to do in the coming 3 years. But that coming 3 years has a new set of project activity that you're looking at. So the project activity is, you have to look at what DBEs are available to engage in that project activity. So if that number is low in terms of DBEs that operate in that space, again, that baseline figure is going to be lower because the DBEs that are available are lower based on the kind of work activity you're doing. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at DBEs that are ready, willing, and able, that are available to do that work being anticipated in those next 3 years of project activity.
Okay, it still seems to be the numbers are such outliers that your goal is going to be unattainable based on the fact that there's just not enough ready, willing, and able participants.
Well, I think that's why the goal is lower. That 6% is certainly lower than what we've had in the past on our FTA-funded projects. We were previously at 9%, 3 years prior to that, 10%. So because the projects are changing, the DBEs available to do that work are changing, and the amount of work changes. So that number, that 6%, again, is supposed to be indicative of what we've done in the past. We want to be close to where we were. We don't want a number that, as you said, an outliner that's way beyond where we've been or way below where we've been. And that 6% is certainly within sort of the realm of that 9% that we've had previously, the previous 3 years. So that 6%, again, when I talked about the participation opportunity, the monitoring, the support, we work toward that 6% by making sure that we're looking at those individual projects, identifying the DBEs, and then communicating with them that this work is available and supporting them to get engaged in it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How did we do with the 9 and 10% goals? What were the actuals in those 3 years?
The attainment for FTA in the prior 3 years was 12%, 11.39%, and 9% for 17, 18, 19.
Ms. Willis is online to the question as well.
Ms. Lemon?
Yes. So Kimberly left?
No, she's right here.
Okay.
No,
Can
ma'am,
she
I'm
hear?
here.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
All right, so I'm a
Okay.
little confused and I'm a little concerned.
Okay.
So in your first part of the presentation, you were giving actual amounts of money raised or earned by DBEs. I'm really curious as how that compares to the total, the sum total. So if I make $5 and the total that was available to be made was $5 million, that gives me a different picture than if I make $5 and the total amount available was $20. So when you're giving this report, it would be helpful to have that information included in the slide so we can actually understand the impact and the and the success, the true success of this, because if in fact you're looking at just dollars, if you're looking at dollars to gauge your success, then we actually need to have the whole picture, and we don't have the whole picture based on those slides that you presented earlier.
So
So if you say
certainly,
$138 million was earned by DBEs, $138 million out of $150 million or out of $5 trillion is my point.
I understand.
So that needs to be updated and resent to the board.
Will do. Okay.
And then the other piece of my concern is, I know that other counties and other governments have significantly higher DBE goals in Georgia, and somehow they're able to make those goals, and it's similar work to what we do at Georgia DOT. So I'm curious how you guys have engaged the industry to identify ways in which we can ensure success and not continue to miss the mark, because as long as we miss the mark, we will continue to lower the goal.
So certainly we rely heavily, Ms. Lemon, on our supportive services engagement to contact, to engage, to stay engaged with our disadvantaged business enterprises about what their needs are, about where the project activity can happen, et cetera. But know that there are certainly nuanced differences between what we do here at Georgia DOT and what some of those local government entities do with regard to DBE, minority business, women business enterprise, et cetera. So their market is going to be their location. Our market is the state of Georgia in its entirety. So, you know, we have to consider the whole of the state as opposed to, you know, those more heavily populated areas of the state, those large counties that have more diversity and have more DBEs available to work on the projects than we might have in the entirety of the state and in some of those more rural and remote communities where we may be doing projects, but may have a limited number of DBEs available to operate on those projects because they have not indicated a willingness to work in some of those outlying communities.
Which goes to my point. How have you engaged the industry to identify ways in which we can actually meet our goal and not continue to miss the goal, and by missing the goal, continue to lower the goal? If you say that the available workers are in larger cities, larger areas, then why would we not use those projects in those areas to up the goal, if you will, instead of having it at 9 or 10%, have it at 15 or 20%, so that you can offset what you're not experiencing in some of the more rural areas of the state? Because I don't see that's what's happening. You're continuing to put the goal around 10 to 12%, even in areas where there's obviously more available DBEs to do the work.
But some of that consideration is going to be for the work type. So even though we may be in, say, Fulton County, for example, where you can expect a larger number of DBEs, it depends on the work activity that's happening in Fulton County. You may have a large number of DBEs that do asphalt, but if you're doing specialty bridge work in Fulton County, you may not have that same number of DBEs represented in that specialty bridge work category. And so the number is going to be lower. But certainly it is about the disadvantaged business enterprise telling us where they have an interest in working. We certainly try to make sure that we communicate to them where our projects are going to be so that we can solicit and secure that interest from them in those other places. In some instances, those DBEs will agree to extend themselves to some of those other areas, but in some, they want to stay where they've decided they're comfortable working, where they have created a niche for themselves, where they know the work, where they know the suppliers, and they stay in those areas. But certainly we are continuing to work with our supportive services, to work with those DBEs, and to work, to your point, with the industry to find out how we can better support those DBEs and expand the opportunities for them.
Is that all, Ms. Lemon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner?
Yeah, I just want to thank Dana for her comments and so noted. I think one slide you did show the 9% for the 6 months, which was the race conscious goal.
Yes, sir.
Which will be going forward. So that is a representative of federal share, but we didn't show you the total on state spend. But Kimberly, I think if you'd reaffirm in our conversation the other day, I understood that with this reporting, this would be the highest dollar value earning, be it federal and state, in our history. So I do want to accentuate the positive of the dollars going out that DBEs are taking advantage of is the highest that we've achieved to date. Is
This
that?
time last year, again, with each of those, not just federal spend, but the state monies that we included as well, we were at 120 million. So at 138 million this year, that is a larger number for the same time last year. But certainly the question of how that compares to the entirety of the pool of funds that we have, I will include that and submit it to Kristen for her to supply to the board.
Thank you, Kimberly. And to affirm to the board is, you know, we still have work to do. I do want to commend Kimberly and her team for doing a tremendous job, but there's still work to be done. And pre-COVID, we were out across the state in other markets, Savannah, Macon, Albany, as I recall, and some other places around the state to try to, again, generate interest, connect, provide opportunity for people, contractors to engage in those areas as well. As Kimberly noted, sometimes when you're in those areas, you don't have the pool that goes into that calculus of step one of ready, willing, and able. So it's a big state. We still have a lot of work to do, but just want to commend Kimberly and the staff for the work they've done thus far and for the update. And Mr. Abel, I had the same question. That number looked a little low, but what you've seen historically is we've been able to achieve more as it relates to FTA. But that is the metric of the math, and is also the 3 years, Mr. Carricker, the 3 years on the FHWA side. I believe it was the 2018 year that we had a really large year in DBE that actually skewed the numbers up because of a DBE contractor out on our Northwest Corridor project, I believe it was, that had a really large contract value. So that mean sort of is a way of tempering, as Kimberly said, not too high, not too low, with sort of recent past in that step two adjustment. And again, those are all federal sort of, you plug and chug federal formula, put the data in, you know, hit enter, get the data out kind of process. And it's a big data set that they work through of Ready, Will, and Able. So thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me comment.
You're welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Any more questions from anyone? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Ms. King.
Chair, I'm glad to come before you this afternoon, and I'm here to request to open board rules to update for the installation, relocation, and management of utilities on public rights-of-way, Chapter 67211. As background, just last month, June 17th, we opened this board rule, and at that time, it established a public comment period on those changes proposed at that time that would last to August the 5th. coming to you today to bring forth a further modification to the rule needed to address one specific aspect, electric membership corporations. A note, a reminder, our intent throughout all of this, last month, this month, is to streamline and modernize the rules, recognizing that changes to the telecom industry that have occurred over the past 30-plus years. It's easy for me to go back and remember when we used to call relatives at certain times in the evening so that we would get the lower rates. And it was a big deal when cable TV came to our neighborhood. The kids that I babysat for had it. I didn't. But all this, a lot's happened. And the rules have gradually evolved over time to the extent that today, it's all data. Whether that data is a phone conversation, TV, streaming video, your websites, it's all data. And increasingly, it's all on fiber optic cable. So, all of that, nothing really is changing. Everything that we brought to you last month, as is. This that I'm bringing you today is in addition to that. So out of an abundance of caution, to provide clarity and transparency throughout all of this, we're proposing to completely restart the comment period for the industry to comment upon the entire proposed rule. That brought forth a month ago, that added today. There have been concerns expressed about various aspects of the proposed rule. I think it might be good to take a minute, focus a little bit on some of the concerns, as many of those concerns appear to be based upon perhaps an incomplete reading of what we brought forth a month ago, coupled with other notions about it. For instance, one issue is that the proposed board rule, and it's in there, it's in the first section, purposes, requires that the department audit the fees every 5 years or more frequently. And that's because the department's intent is to cover the utility program costs and not more. And in fact, the two sentences that say the 5-year audit and say the intent of the fees are right next to each other. The permit fees shall not result in the recovery of more than those actual costs incurred by the department. And then right after it, the department shall perform or cause to be performed an audit at a minimum every 5 years. Note, for a typical year's worth of permits, and really this has been pretty stable over the past several years, only about 15% of those permits are for telecommunications. The rest are for electric power and other non-communications utilities. And all of the edits this month, only relate to telecommunications. Some utility companies have agreements in place already with the department concerning their right-of-way use fees. The department, this rule will allow those agreements to stay in place if that is what those companies choose to do. Somewhat more specifically, EMCs already pay right-of-way use fees. They do so as an as a non-communications utility, to use the words that we've just proposed last month. But with this purported board rule, this change that I'm going to introduce today, EMCs won't pay additional fees if they choose to provide broadband services to their membership. GDOT operates very differently. States, cities, and counties' view of right-of-way use fees stands to be different than ours. Our view of our network and these industries and their presence on our right-of-way is unique because, frankly, our scope is the 18,000 miles of state roads border to border, spread across the biggest state east of the Mississippi. And so our view and how we look at this and how we work to manage that stands to be different than that a political subdivision, a city or a county might. Going forward, for telecommunications, all fees will be flat per permit fees. The ongoing annual fee will be a flat per permit fee, not per mile going forward. There's already a robust telecom industry present in Georgia, already present on our rights-of-way, compliant with our current right-of-way fees, which has been in place for, well, goes back to the 80s. With this rule, we're providing certainty and we're providing consistency where frankly it just didn't exist before. As I just said, all telecom infrastructure will be assessed similarly per permit. No distinctions between long distance and cable and trunk lines and such. We're going to treat and define permits as has been done historically, though, taking from our prior way of doing business with the industry and continuing it. As a quick example, in our current way of doing business, we don't require a utility to take out a permit to perform maintenance on their facilities. We don't require that. We're not going to start requiring that either. No reason to change. If they need to do maintenance on what they have out there, they can go do it. To the extent that it's more major maintenance, they would contact our district utilities folks, but it doesn't require a permit. The proposed board rule provides a definition that simply didn't exist, and that as relates to the 5G industry and its proliferation of shorter but more poles to install its equipment on. That was simply not allowed under the former rule. And, as I started these comments, the department is bound to audit the fees every 5 years, or more frequently, so that we can manage the program effectively and efficiently and be good stewards of what we are managing. So, EMCs pay right-of-way use fees already as non-communications utilities. This modification is to clarify that EMCs don't pay fees twice if they choose to also provide broadband services. Support for this idea has been provided by the Georgia Public Service Commission as well. Specifically, and getting to the words, we're proposing two things to accomplish this. In 672.11.02, the definitions, we're adding a definition for EMCs. There wasn't one previously. So EMC means an electric membership cooperative, which is a member-owned and not-for-profit utility. And then, later on, in 672.11.04.2D2, pretty deep, in other words, notwithstanding otherwise applicable references of 47 U.S.C. 253, the department shall waive the application fee and or the annual permit fee for EMCs where the sole purpose of a permit is to provide broadband internet access service. Any waiver under this subsection will remain in effect for as long as the use of the permit remains the same. Just to give you a sense of what's happened in that past month, we've had ongoing outreach interaction with the utility industry. We had a webinar just last week. In the world of Teams, there were 45 people listed on the attendee list. Probably more than that present. In a few cases, we could tell that there were several people clustered around the computer. As well, there have been informal conversations with various organizations and companies. And to date, we've not received any comments on the rule as it was opened up a month ago. That's not really surprising. Typically, those comments will come in immediately prior to the due date. So nothing remarkable there, just reporting to give you a sense. So, I'm here today asking for you to open the board rule to update installation, relocation, and management of utilities on public rights-of-way, Chapter 67211, and extend the current comment period to August 16th, 2021. Are there any questions?
I have one, Mr. Chair. You may explain it and I missed it, but going back to the audit, the 5-year, the audit, is that a department internal audit, that program, or are you talking about auditing the companies that are accessing the right-of-way?
That would be a department, it would be an audit conducted by our audits office of the department's program.
So it's an internal audit that should really be of no concern to those using our right-of-way? Or should it be a concern to those using our right-of-way?
The purpose of the audit is to ensure that the monies received as fees coordinate well with the expenses that we incur in running the program. Yes, sir.
Indication being that if the audit shows that we're collecting materially more money, then we go and change the rules again to change it?
Whatever the result of the audit is, we stand to pause and say, okay, what's the best way of addressing this difference?
Disparity. Okay.
Recognizing that there are a lot of factors that would go into that sort of the product of that assessment.
You mentioned at least every 5 years or more frequent. Is there a definition around what more frequent might mean, or how often more frequent could occur?
It's not defined in the rule. I would suggest that we all would benefit from a few years, and you could argue that I'm not being definite there, to get some of this new fee structure under our belt so that we could better understand and attempt to draw something of trends. That's one of the things I am a fan of, is building a history of several years so that we can see if trends are emerging. But that's just me talking.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair, let me sort of add into that conversation is sort of similar to the previous conversation. We've gone back and done a lot of historical analysis of permit type, quantity, et cetera, to try to right size what these fees are, and feel pretty confident that is the right dollar amount, not to be profitable, but only to manage a program. Again, with for-profit utilities using publicly funded rights-of-ways is the logic there. And John is right. You know, you've got a permit fee, initial permit fee, and then a reoccurring annual fee. So you need at least 2 years to have a good base. So, you know, and we do look at that program, because this time of year or next month we'll be talking about budget proposals, and the Office of Utilities certainly works with Angela and her office on budgets, and they know what they receive and when they receive it. And so, you know, they have we'll know, you know, pretty quickly if there's some outlier here that needs to be adjusted one way or the other. And permit volume is, again, there has been an uptick, as John talked about, the percentages of telecoms. That is an uptick over the last few years, and I anticipate still an uptick as broadband is more deployed more across Georgia in the unserved areas. But, you know, that's, again, that was the sort of getting away from the punitive of a per mile based approach, where it's punitive in the rural areas where you have low density of users. You know, you cover many miles for the few users versus a metro area where you've got a lot of users in a short mile. So that was really a sort of a disproportionate or unfair assessment when you look at a business case. So we're just trying to get it back down to really cost-based. But again, I think we've got to have at least 2 years, as a 2 years plus, to have a good look to make sure we're at the right place. Thank you.
We want to provide a good environment where organizations would be strongly desirous about making those investments. Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we need to have a motion to extend?
Second.
A motion and a second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hibbert.
Thank you all very much.
You want me to do louder? There. Ann may be online, so, Ann, I'm standing in for you today like you did for me last month. But, with that, Kelly would come, give us a report from the planning office, on lump sum, programs.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and board, before Kelly starts, I did want to get up and just do a brief introduction for her and also express from Janine. I know this is the first planning committee meeting since Janine has been the director of planning, and unfortunately she was not able to attend today. She was called away to the governor's office for a meeting, so she did want to express her regret for that as well. But we don't want to have her lack of presence indicate any lack of excitement for the things that we're doing in the planning office and the things we're working on, one of which that we're really excited for Kelly to talk to you guys about is the new lump sum programs. Those things were born out of conversations, especially with our districts and our district engineers, who are expressing ways to try to find opportunities for more improvements, especially in our rural areas and improving freight mobility. It was incorporated into our SSTP and into the STIP, both of which were adopted by the board earlier this year. And Kelly Gwynn, who is the director, the branch chief of our rural office here in planning, has been diligently working to turn those from a plan into a reality. And so we're very excited, very pleased with her, and thank her very much for her hard work, and let Kelly come up and explain those new programs to you.
May I just take my, I think this is supposed to start at 2:45. I think this is a little bit early. Agenda change, 2:30. Okay.
Great, well, I'm glad I was here on time. I did not realize it changed. Good afternoon, everyone. As Matt mentioned, I'm presenting on behalf of Director Miller. So I am over the rural planning branch. We have two new lump sum programs. They're going to be housed under the Office of Planning. This is the first time the Office of Planning has the ability to be able to manage programs. So we're under the lump sum programs, and we're really excited about this opportunity. The rural planning lump sum is going to be housed under my branch, and then we have the freight operations lump sum, which is going to be housed under our freight branch in planning. As Matt mentioned, back in February, the board and the governor approved the 2021 statewide strategic transportation plan. One of the investment strategies that was identified as part of that plan was the implementation of these two new lump sum programs. While the plan was being updated, Janine was having the ability to have monthly meetings with our district engineers, and a common theme that she kept hearing from the districts was that there was a number of small scale but yet critical construction projects for their districts that they didn't have a good program to fund them through. Some examples of what I mean by that is these projects were too large for the quick response program. The quick response program is projects that have to be under $200,000. They're normally let to construction within 3 to 4 months. So something like a turn lane extension would be a good example of that. So they couldn't fall under that program. Some of our safety and operations lump sum programs have a defined benefit cost ratio that some of these projects weren't necessarily meeting. And then also they're not large enough to qualify for our regular capital construction program. So we knew that we definitely wanted to find a way to fund these projects. We wanted to be able to support local and regional planning initiatives. So through these two new programs, there's multiple goals that the department will be able to meet. First and foremost, helping to support the implementation of Governor Kemp's strategic goals for the state, which also align directly with the goals that were established as part of the SSTP. Some of the governor's goals, such as expanding Georgia's role as a world-renowned hub, might help if I got on the right, as a world-renowned hub for global commerce, strengthening rural Georgia, increasing rural broadband access for economic growth, and improving transportation safety and security will all be able to be directly supported through the types of projects that we will be able to fund with these two new programs. Also, as I mentioned, being able to implement quickly is important. While we can't do the 3 to 4 month turnaround that the quick response program is able to provide, what we are requiring is that projects will be able to be let to construction within 24 months of notice of award, with the preference being given to projects that will be able to be let to construction within 12 months of notice of award. And really the main thing that we're looking to accomplish with these programs is take the already great transportation network that we have in the state, be able to leverage it for future growth, and then also enhance safety and improve roadway operations at the same time. So I want to bring your attention to the map that's on the right-hand side of the slide. What you're seeing here with all these little dots are the grad site locations across the state of Georgia. There's 67 of them. If you're not familiar with the GRAD program, it stands for Georgia Ready for Accelerated Development. This is housed under the Georgia Department of Economic Development. And the purpose of this program is it's a proactive program where they take existing sites, certify them for industrial development, and they'll be ready for fast-track construction. So where this plays into the freight operations lump sum is one of the preferences, not the only one, but one of the preferences that we'll give for project submissions if they're within 5 miles of one of these grad sites. Another thing that you'll notice here on the map is the gray boundary areas. These are for the 16 MPOs in the state. This ties in with our rural development lump sum program because only projects that are outside of the MPO areas will be eligible for funding under that program. Georgia consistently ranks #1 as a state to do business in, and programs like the GRAD program really help to keep us in that standing, and GDOT's really proud to be able to help support that initiative from a state level. Lump sum programs obviously are not new to GDOT, but these are 2 new ones that we have, so we just consider this an additional tool in the toolbox as another funding source to be able to move projects forward. So going into specifics on these 2 programs, I'll start with the rural development. This particular program is going to advance existing and future rural development by targeting any of the 4 following project areas: safety and operations improvements, supporting public safety communications, broadband infrastructure, and innovative transportation solutions. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, this is some examples of the types of projects. This is definitely not everything that we can fund under the program, but it will give you an idea of the types of projects we'll be able to put funding on. The picture that you see there is a passing lane project in Macon County. That's a perfect example of the type of project that we'd be able to fund under the rural development lump sum. Another thing about this particular program is that any type of roadway, both on and off system, will qualify for funding as long as it meets the program goals and helps support the strategic planning initiatives from the department's perspective. For both of these programs, we have $10 million in funding identified in fiscal year 22. And then what's even better news is starting in fiscal year 23 and beyond, we have $20 million identified for these programs. So the funding is going to be an even split, with half of it coming from federal funding sources and the other half coming from state funding sources. All right, and then on the other side of the house in planning, we're going to have the freight operations lump sum program. The purpose of this is to fund projects that meet one of these 2 areas here: improving reliability and or safety of freight operations, and reducing community impacts caused by freight vehicle movements. So I know you guys get approached by this because we get approached by the locals as well. One of the common things we hear, for example, is downtown has a lot of trucks and maybe they have issues with making a sharp turn. So things like an operational improvement is something that we'll be able to fund through this particular program. This program is statewide, so we can fund within MPO areas and also in rural areas of the state. Some of the preferences that we'll give for projects when they're submitted is if they are within 5 miles of a grad site, if they're on the state freight network, if they're in close proximity to a major intermodal facility, such as a distribution center or a rail yard, and then also projects that are included in local and regional rate plans. We really want to recognize the planning that's going on across the state at a more local level and be able to help them move forward with some of the needs that they have in their particular areas of the state. I do want to make sure that you have an understanding of how the project submission is going to work on these programs. So I first want to give credit to our district engineers. Their support and feedback has been invaluable through the development of the business rules for these two programs. We've had individual interviews with a lot of them. As Matt mentioned, this really is a brainchild of the districts, these two new lump sum programs being developed and funding being allocated to them. We also took our draft business rules and had them reviewed by not only the districts, but Traffic Ops and Safety, the LMIG office, Financial Management and Program Delivery. And it was extremely helpful to be able to get feedback from other areas of the department, especially offices that have been managing lump sum programs for years, because they were able to point out, some changes that we needed to make in the rules to make these programs function more efficiently when we get them up and running. So who can identify and submit projects? This is going to be limited to GDOT district engineers, the Office of Planning, and Office of Traffic Operations. The districts are really our first line of communication with the locals, and trust me that they already have a great list of potential projects. We've seen some of the draft lists. We could easily be funding those for the first couple of fiscal years, so I don't think we're going to have any problems. I mean, quite honestly, the challenge is going to be selecting which ones, so I think we're going to get a lot of good submissions this first round. The time frame that we're looking at for the project submission window is during the month of July. Obviously, we're in July right now. This is the first year that we're getting this program up and running, so we're targeting late July into early August this time around, but starting in fiscal year 23, we're hoping to be able to hit July 1st, open the submission window. If for some reason we don't allocate all the funds during that first round, we will consider another one because we want to make sure we spend all of the funds each fiscal year. So right now we are working on an online portal development with IT and communications that'll allow us to be able to take the submissions, have them filled out, and be submitted online. That won't be ready for a couple of months. So right now, for this first open round of project submissions, we're just going to handle it via email. If a project is not selected, it will be able to be resubmitted to be considered for funding during the next round. And the way project selection is going to work is we're going to have a committee made up of a representative from planning, program delivery, and traffic operations. And then they'll work directly with the program managers to review the submissions, look at them for eligibility, and then turn around and make recommendations to the director of planning, the chief engineer, and the commissioner for which projects to fund and how much funding to give. The funding that we will be awarding for each project will be between greater than $200,000 and less than and equal to $2 million. But just because we can only award $2 million does not mean the project cannot cost more than that. If it has a higher cost, then we'll just need to cover in the project submission where the additional funding is coming from. The last thing I want to point out about the project submission is for the first 2 fiscal years, we will not be requiring a construction phase. We want to leave the ability for, a couple of projects. If we, for some reason, don't get enough submissions, we want to leave some projects to be submitted that may not have a construction phase. Starting 2 years out from now, though, every project will have to be able to show that they can be let to construction within 2 years. So, as I mentioned, this is going to be a great learning opportunity for our staff. I know the districts are extremely eager to start putting in project submissions. They've already been contacting us about when we're going to send the application out. We're wrapping up the final pieces of that, and it should be ready within the next week or two. I want to thank Trang Mai. She works with me in the rural planning group, and she's been the project manager on the development of the business rules. She's done a great job. We definitely would not be where we are right now without her working on this. And then also Commissioner McMurray and our partners at Federal Highway Georgia Division have both been extremely supportive of us getting these programs up and running. So we're really excited about this. And I'd open it up for any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm not recognizing Jamie. I've already made that clear in previous committee meetings. So you're not recognized. That looks like one of my projects, by the way, Kelly, right there. So, I appreciate that. A good roundabout.
In
But-
Schley County, yes. I think it's one of the.
Jamie, I was gonna call on Ann first.
Actually.
Yes,
ahead,
thank you,
Jamie.
Mr. Chair.
Well, never mind. Go ahead, Ann. You outrank Jamie.
I don't think so. It's all equal here. But Kelly, I want to thank you for such a fantastic report to our committee today, in addition to all the board members. I think that this has been overdue, particularly in our rural areas, as shown today about what has been done. Also want to thank our team for the response in regards for our area engineers being able to, our district engineers being able to bring them in, so because they're the ones that have the feet on the ground. And thank you for all the effort that has gone into all of the phases that we're introducing, and to just let the whole board know that we are working on a calendar so that we will be bringing additional information at least every other month, if not every month, so as updates to you. But what we're looking at now is every other month. And Kelly, thank you so much for all of this and your team. And I thank also Janine as well as Matt and Tom McQueen as we go forward. And thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate all that you do. And now back to Jamie.
Yep. Thank you, Annie. Jamie?
It says a maximum is $2 million.
$2 million.
Right.
Mhm.
If a project is more than that, can it be done in 2 years? Can you go so much one year and take some out of the next?
So as of right now, it's written to be able to receive funding once. I will put the disclaimer out there. This is a work in progress.
Oh,
So, you know,
just a thought.
yeah, no, and I'm sure you're not going to be the only one that asked that. As of right now, the idea is because these projects need to be able to get to construction, we'd like to just award it once. But I think that's definitely up for discussion once we see how the first year or two go.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions from, the board, Commissioner?
Mr.
Who-
Chairman, I
somebody
have a
else?
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Dana. I have a question.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I missed the first part of the presentation. Is this new funding, or we're basically taking it from our existing federal allocation?
It is not new funding, no. We're just redistributing money into these new programs.
Commissioner?
Yes, that's correct, Kelly. In the capital construction budget as presented last year and what's been approved for FY22 that we're now in, it is a subset in the capital construction budget and on the state level. And then, as Kelly mentioned, there would be federal fund sources that would be, the federal fund source could be varied based on where the project is, meeting certain different federal thresholds, but it is not new fund sources at this point. So
So I wasn't quite finished yet, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
So since it's not new funding, how are we notifying those communities whose projects are being changed or pushed out because of this funding no longer being available?
Yeah, don't
See, the funding
anticipate
was
that.
already allocated somewhere because it wasn't just sitting out there. So how are we going to be notifying those communities whose projects may be being pushed out because of this?
Yeah, so our budget increased last year into this year, so I don't anticipate that there's a loss of a project because one of these projects may move forward. It is additive from that point of view that it's not necessarily new money, but the 22 budget was larger.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to chime in too and say that we have not in planning had to shift any projects because of this particular program. You know, if a project just occurred, it's going to be something due to a project being behind schedule or, you know, another problem that caused the shift, and we're not having to move anything out for this particular lump sum.
And Mr. Vice Chair there, just was going to say this is a little bit like Goldilocks, sort of trying to find the right fit here between quick response and the full big federal projects that are massive. But these will certainly move the needle in a lot of places, and it's been a challenge. And I want to thank Janine for recognizing that, working with our districts and Kelly and Train and everybody to stand this up pretty quickly. I think it will make a difference and fit a need that we have that we don't have a tool work with now. I want to go back, though, Kelly had a slide that said, who can identify / submit by offices? Well, you all can identify, and as you all know, your district engineer is your first stop, right, locally. So as you see those needs and you work with your cities and counties, and Kelly actually highlighted that, you know, working with a local plan, if there's something that's in a local plan, certainly matters. So feel free as you see those kind of needs, and it's the list the district engineers have already come from you. So feel free to engage with the district and the planning team as well. Reach out to Janine and Kelly or Matt to talk about, hey, you know, there's a new warehouse distribution center going in on, you know, the county road, and this intersection, wow, it's going to be overwhelmed. You know, those are the kind of things we need to know about and hear about, and this is exactly where this could be applied to. So feel free to, as you always do. And Kelly, that's where their list come from, by the way. So
I assume. I mean, there's a lot of good projects on there. One other thing I think that'll be of note to the locals is there's not a local match required in the rural areas on either program. So that's something I think they definitely would be interested in hearing.
That is very good. So you'll have a lot of interest now that this has become public, and the list will get bigger. So, but it's all for good reasons. The lump sum, as Kelly mentioned, that's a term of art we use here. That just means that out of all these projects, you don't have to go and have a list in the STIP of a one-off project. And it's the same as we approach safety and operational projects, where they're a little more quick, a little more agile, and it's not quite the formal budgeting process. It's, again, you've got criteria, selection criteria to choose how they move forward, and to be a little more agile and not like a big federal aid project or a big capacity project that, you know, you've got to chart things out very succinctly. It allows us to move a little more quickly. So that is another advantage in, quote, what lump sum means. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Lemon, do you have any other questions? If not, Jeff Lewis is recognized.
No, sir.
Thank you.
There you go.
I want to kind of trail on the back of what Jamie was asking earlier with the money amounts. Does the awarding of the money follow the project or the applicant? In other words, can a single applicant apply for multiple projects?
Yes, that can happen as
Okay.
long as it's a separate project.
Let me add into that. The money will be on a budget year. These are state and federal dollars, as we always do. We use state and federal dollars in the budget years they're allocated for. So it's not sort of a rolling piggy bank that if you can bank it up. I knew where Jamie was going. He's banking his money to do a $10 million project over there. So he's already trying to get around the rules, you see. So but no, it's again to be agile and quick and deploy the dollars. Very similar to quick response, where you can really get out there and make a difference pretty quickly. Only a little bit larger than quick response.
Any other questions from those on the phone or those in person? If not, Commissioner, thank you. Kelly, thank you. This quick response projects, I can just tell you, it's very important for my area. I know other rural areas, they depend on it. And I really appreciate the work y'all put into this. It's going to affect a lot of rural areas particularly, and it's going to be a great benefit. So thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, we stand adjourned.
He'll be happy about my motion, please. Ken? Right on. Find something right on. Take it off to top box and knock through it. Or you can take it to the room.
Thank you.
Huh?
Start. our meeting for Committee of the Whole. At this time, I'd like to get an update on the 400 Express Lane procurement with Meg Perkle, please. Meg?
Good afternoon, Chairman, Board, Commissioner. I appreciate the opportunity to come here today and give you an update on the State Route 400 Express Lanes project and our next steps. Just a little reminder that this is an active and ongoing procurement, so there may be some information I'm unable to share today, but I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. We're going to be talking about the project, our procurement process and status, and our next steps. And ultimately, in the future, it will require board action for us to move ahead with this project, and so that's why I'm presenting to you today, to make sure you're up to date for what may come in the future weeks or months. So a little background on State Route 400. If you go way back to the beginning, in 2007, the board adopted a resolution that said all new capacity on freeways in Metro Atlanta will be managed. And so that set the ball rolling for our managed lane implementation plan and system plan, of which Georgia 400 Express Lanes is a part of that. And it's also in the Atlanta Regional Commission Regional Transportation Plan. In 2016, we announced the MMIP program, which included the Georgia 400 Express Lanes project. Since then, we've received a $184 million infra grant from USDOT, one of the largest grants ever awarded for that. We've executed our joint resolution with CERTA, and we've had our first virtual public hearing open house on this project and received our environmental approval in early 2021. So we've made a lot of progress on this project since MMIP was announced. Y'all have seen this slide many times, but just a reminder of the project. Georgia 400 will provide in each direction from the MARTA North Spring stations just north of I-285 to McGinnis Ferry Road, two express lanes from the North Spring stations up to McGinnis Ferry Road, and then one express lane in each direction up to McFarland Parkway. It will also provide direct express lane connections to MARTA's existing North Spring station, and it will accommodate future bus rapid transit in the corridor. And future bus rapid transit stations will be accommodated at Holcomb Bridge Road and North Point Mall, but those will be built in the future by MARTA. CERTA will be operating the tolling on this project. We've conducted a lot of stakeholder engagement and public comment opportunities for this project. And in response to the feedback from the public, we've made changes to the project. Some of the things that have changed since our initial public information open houses back in 2019, we tweaked the design and made adjustments to eliminate the need to acquire any property from the Fulton County School Board. We have adjusted the design at the State Route 400 south of Northridge Road to allow the express lanes to travel under Northridge Road rather than over. The cities of Alpharetta, Roswell, and Sandy Springs have all designed and funded aesthetic improvements to the bridges in their jurisdictions. They wanted pretty bridges, and they're willing to design them and pay for them. That's a great partnership. And to reduce right-of-way impacts, we're going to have temporary construction detours so that we can take bridges out that are overpasses and not be building another bridge right next to it where we would have to buy extra right-of-way. And part of the public involvement process, we asked, would you rather us build a bridge next to it and keep it open during construction, or take it out and have a detour? And the overwhelming response was to have detours. We've also held the public hearing open house, which was for the environmental document. This was our first ever virtual public hearing open house. We received many comments and great feedback, and it has really set the tone for how we can do public hearings in the future. Since the time we held the public hearing, we've had over 8,000 visitors to the website to look at information for the project. And now here we are in the last stretch with the proposal executive summary, currently advertised, which was advertised for comments in the month of July. And I will discuss a little bit more about that later. So a reminder that this is kind of two projects in one. What's really unique about this project is that it builds express lanes, but it also provides the backbone for future bus rapid transit, what we like to call express lane transit in the corridor. Bus rapid transit in the Georgia 400 corridor is MARTA's preferred alternative for transit service in the Georgia 400 corridor. And it was also adopted by the Fulton County Transit Plan that the mayors did in Fulton County. It will also use $100 million in state GO bonds. These are transit bonds dedicated by the state of Georgia, which will help facilitate the development of the BRT corridor along Georgia 400. It'll provide 12 miles of bus rapid transit, and it will be able to operate immediately upon opening between the North Spring Station and the Windward Parkway Park and Ride lot. BRT vehicles will also use the express lanes for more reliable on-time performance, and the operation will be by MARTA. The ultimate funding for the build-out of additional stations will be determined by MARTA and the ATL. So this project is unique in that we have a construction period and a maintenance period. We currently anticipate that the agreement will include multiple different payments to the developer. So during construction, we'll make milestone or progress payments, and they'll be paid out of these sources of funds listed here: our infra grant, the local funds that we're going to receive from the 3 local entities I mentioned, the general obligation transit bonds I just mentioned, and $60 million in guaranteed revenue bonds that will be sold by CERTA. During the maintenance period, we will be making availability payments. This is sort of like a monthly mortgage payment, and they will be paid out of federal funds, state funds, as well as the toll revenues that will be collected in the corridor by CERTA. So during the maintenance period, the 35 years following substantial completion, these payments will be made, and it will also be used to pay back the financing of the design and construction that happened during the construction period. So let's talk a little bit about the financing tools we make available to the proposers. The combination of design, construction, and maintenance into a single contract offers opportunities for innovation, efficiency, as well as hopefully the speeding up the cost of delivery and cost-effective delivery. This is the largest project ever undertaken by GDOT to date, and the ability to pay for the project over a 35-year period is valuable, especially given the need to also progress other projects in the MMIP program. In order to get the best value for the state, we intend to take advantage of several low-interest federal funding and financing programs. TIFIA, GDOT worked with U.S. DOT Build America Bureau to include the term sheet for a TIFIA loan in the request for proposals. So the proposers would have the option to use a TIFIA loan as part of their financial proposal. The P3 developer will be the ultimate borrower of any TIFIA loan, and these have lower than market interest rates. Similarly, GDOT requested and received provisional allocation of private activity bonds, or PABs, for up to $503 million, which was also made available to the proposers. And this allows them to facilitate private financing with not subject to federal income tax. So let's talk about the procurement process to date. So this project will be the state's first design, build, finance, maintain with a 35-year maintenance term after the construction is complete. So that 35-year maintenance term will pay off the design and construction financing, as well as include routine maintenance and capital maintenance in the corridor. So I have the analogy here on the slide of a house mortgage payment, but it's different. So let me summarize for you why this procurement is so different. When we let projects, Albert presents projects to y'all every month about what we're letting. And we talk, well, for example, tomorrow he's going to present a State Route 133 widening project out in Southwest Georgia. But we don't talk about what we're going to be doing over the next 35 years to mow along that project, fill potholes, fill cracks, replace the striping every few years, and then every 10 or 12 years resurface it, or if it's concrete, replace cracked slabs. But that's exactly what we're asking for here on this project. It includes everything. So the contract is much more than just design and construction. It'd be comparable to you buying a house and not just paying your mortgage, but also paying for your roof in 10 years and your new carpet in 15 years, plus the weekly lawn service, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little different. I hope that helps you understand what that's like. I just replaced my AC and my roof, so I wish it was all included in my mortgage, but it wasn't. So So this is a competitive procurement. Over the course of the last 11 months, the department's team worked closely with the interested firms in pursuit of this highly competitive project. We held an industry forum with almost 200 people in attendance, conducted one-on-one meetings after the industry forum with 14 firms. 6 teams submitted statements of qualifications, and included over 60 major team members. 3 teams were shortlisted last summer, and 2 proposals were received in May of this year. 3 teams were shortlisted in June of 2020 and were fully engaged in procurement up through May of 2021. We received and responded to 96 alternative technical concepts. So that's like innovation and design that they submit to us, and we review and say, yes, you can include that in your project. We've responded to over 1,500 proposer questions. We've had 24 one-on-one meetings, and we benefited from having 3 proposers engaged throughout the procurement process. 2 proposals were submitted on May 25th, 2021. That was the deadline. In the evaluation process, 1 proposal was determined to be responsive. Since we had competition at the time of proposal submittal, it is okay to move forward with the 1 responsive proposal. Per state law, Georgia DOT must provide an opportunity for public comment on the responsive proposer's submitted executive summary, and you've each been provided a copy of this executive summary. The summary is an overview of the proposer's approach to the project, including its ability to satisfy the financial and technical requirements of the project. The executive summary is required to be posted for public comment in accordance with current law for 30 days, and our comment period ended July 4th. We received 15 comments. These comments have been provided to the evaluation team as part of the evaluation process. So here's where we are today. As you know, P3 procurements are lengthy and complex processes. We've accomplished a lot since the notice of intent went out in October of 2019. Throughout the past couple of years, our team has been entrenched in this procurement to keep it on track, productive, and successful. We're looking forward to our final steps as we complete the evaluation of the proposal. As I said earlier, we benefited greatly, despite having only 1 responsive proposal, by having such competition in the procurement process up until the end. We've gone through a lengthy and complex process and are in the home stretch. Proposals submitted by any serious entity for such a long and costly endeavor include many things that the department must evaluate carefully. Thus, we apply appropriate time and process to evaluate the proposal prior to making a recommendation. The next major milestone is a recommendation to award or not award from the P3 steering committee. If the recommendation is to award, the board will be required to have action to move ahead. So since we'll be coming back with a recommendation in the coming weeks or months, I wanted to make sure that you're up to date with the project and the procurement, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jeff?
Thank you, Meg. When you said that you have 1 responsive proposer, if you had 2 responsive proposers, what would be GDOT's step if you had 2 responsive proposers? What would you look at and evaluate?
It's the same whether we have 1 or 2. We're going to evaluate their technical proposal, we give it a score, and then we evaluate the price, the financial proposal, and we ultimately look at the availability payment, and the lowest availability payment would be the successful proposer.
Okay, and since you had 1 responsive proposer, does this process is part of the purpose and nature of this process to potentially narrow it down to just 1 proposer, or was that ever the intention?
That was not the intention, but that's just where we are.
But it's not a bad thing, though.
No.
Okay. And then one last question. You mentioned a term in there I'd like you to expand on just a little bit, and I think it was substantial completion. What does that mean?
Basically, it means open to traffic.
Okay.
I think that's the best
I
way
thought
to
that's what it was, but sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions with anyone online? Okay, if not, thank you, Meg, and we are adjourned for the day.